Hey, look at that, I'm carrying on with two sets of reviews this time, my Fire Emblem Marathon and Shin Megami Tensei, a crossover that I don't think any of us expected, and I know that some of you have been really looking forward to me talking about this, mainly because of the Shin Megami Tensei part. The idea was puzzling at first, but then again, both SMT and Fire Emblem are turn-based RPGs, just one's in a more traditional sense while the other focuses more on strategy. There was a possibility that this collaboration could produce something really amazing. I am of course talking about the Majin Tensei series and the Devil Survivor games. I'm surprised you guys want me to review these so badly, but why not? We'll go through every single game in one big video, so sit back and let's begin with the first in the lineup, Majin Tensei, released in 1994 for the Super Famicom and later on for PCs at the time. Okay, you get the joke now. This is what we'll actually be discussing today, Tokyo Mirage Sessions Sharp FE. We really needed the FE to remind us that Fire Emblem plays a part in this, although in reality the game barely acknowledges it. I'll say now that Tokyo Mirage Sessions is more of an SMT game than a Fire Emblem game, and even then, it's totally more Persona than SMT. Dungeon crawling one moment, socializing with your friends during the next, and wrapping a story around how it's so gosh darn great to have friends. Yeah, if you ever thought Persona could be a little corny at times, wait until you see this game. Comparing Tokyo Mirage Sessions to Persona is like comparing Barney the Dinosaur to Schindler's List. It's that cheesy, but we'll come back to it later. Tokyo Mirage Sessions originally came out for the Wii U back in 2015, though some months before its release it was only known as the Shin Megami Tensei and Fire Emblem crossover project. A proper title didn't get announced until Nintendo's E3 digital event in 2015, the same event that Metroid Prime Federation Force got made public, as well as Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival, and Star Fox Zero before many complained about the controls. Man, 2015 was not a good year for Nintendo to do E3. At least we got the cool puppets, and also one of Satoru Iwata's final moments before he sadly died from a nasty tumor, God bless him. Kaori Ando, Nintendo producer and one of the directors for Tokyo Mirage Sessions, mainly had a whole lot of project management and development support under her belt, with the only other directorial position at the time being for Fossil Fighters Frontier only a year before TMS. While Ando also didn't have any SMT experience, she did at least do debug support for Fire Emblem Radiant Dawn. Ando's initial vision though was to do a collaboration between Fire Emblem and Pokemon, wanting to join forces with Nintendo and Pokemon producer Hitachi Yamagami. Unfortunately for her, this was 2010 when she pitched the idea, and Pokemon Conquest was already being developed for the DS, acting as a tactical RPG of its own, so the next best thing was to cross over with Shin Megami Tensei, the R-rated version of Pokemon. Our high and mighty ATLUS, developer of Shin Megami Tensei and Persona, apparently gave a rather unenthusiastic response when they were approached with the concept, and said that they were simply too busy to get involved. However, over a year later, ATLUS called back to finally agree to do the project, saying that they were always enthusiastic but they really were too busy. If that's true, then that's kind of a dick move on their end, not providing any sort of update on when they could possibly do it. I know that ATLUS likely had a lot on their plate back then, but communication is key when it comes to these things. Either way, ATLUS was on board, and Kaori Ando was joined by Eiji Yoshida as co-director, with Mitsuru Hirata as chief director, both of whom having worked on SMT games in the past. From pitching the idea to the eventual release, Tokyo Mirage Sessions took around 5 whole years to make, but with both ATLUS and Intelligent Systems having vastly different playstyles when it comes to RPGs, they didn't know how exactly to compromise or who was even going to primarily develop the game. This is where Hitachi Yamagami and various staff from Intelligent Systems showed themselves to basically tell ATLUS to stick with what they know. So the final decision came to doing a traditional RPG while trying to cater towards both SMT and Fire Emblem fans, incorporating elements from each series of games. ATLUS even used a scrap concept from Fire Emblem Awakening of taking place in a modern setting, transforming it into several different locations across Tokyo such as Shibuya and Harajuku. That's some intriguing backstory to how Tokyo Mirage Sessions got made, and critically the game wasn't too badly received, but fans of Fire Emblem and SMT were kinda split on the finished product. Some see it as a pretty good game on its own, especially for a new IP from ATLUS, but others can't stand it at all, or at the very least were hugely disappointed with the results of a Fire Emblem and SMT crossover. I'll admit that when I saw the first ever trailer for Tokyo Mirage Sessions back in the day, I was like, what the hell is this shit? Not helping the matter was me being unfamiliar with ATLUS and Shin Megami Tensei games at the time, including Persona. I also had only played Awakening as my first Fire Emblem game, but I could already tell that the series was hardly going to be involved. And with the focus being solely on new characters wanting to start singing careers of all things, I was immediately turned away and didn't look back at it. After finally playing Tokyo Mirage Sessions, I won't lie when I say that it does still have a ton of problems, and we'll definitely go through each of them, but honestly I don't think the game is really that bad, and the trailers didn't do it justice at all. The version I'm using, however, is the re-release Switch port from 2020 with some additions and changes. This includes the ability to skip animations during long session attacks, a brand new optional dungeon with its own set of rewards such as extra characters that come in for sessions, and new costumes for the characters to wear, some of them calling back to S&T, Persona, and Fire Emblem. Yes, I did keep the Joker costume on for a long while. I can't help it, I love that game. Hey, put your costume away, me.
But why? The protagonist gets to wear his.
Doesn't matter, this isn't a Persona game. You shouldn't wear it for every little
Screw you,
thing.
man. I mean, me? How am I even talking to you anyway?
I am a shadow, the true self.
Alright, that I know was definitely the wrong game.
Just put your cosplay away, will ya?
Alright, fine.
Well, don't feel too down, me. Encore at least lets you put glasses on one of the characters because that's apparently what we really needed. Let's start with the story anyway before we go any deeper. I'll go through the initial premise first and then talk about spoilers later on with the usual pre-warning. We open right in the middle of an opera that I'm assuming is based on Fire Emblem since the theme plays during this scene, where a little girl named Tsubasa is watching her older sister perform, and a young man named Yashiro is supporting his dad. However, everyone suddenly begins to vanish from the opera, but that sure as hell ain't gonna stop Yashiro's dad from performing. Look at that, he doesn't even react to Tsubasa's sister disappearing and he still carries on like nothing happened. Now that's dedication to your job, man. The only person that doesn't seem to have evaporated is Tsubasa herself, as she's now left to wonder what happened to everyone, with her sister completely missing or perhaps even worse, worrying about how she's going to cope all on her own. Well, let's cut to 5 years later and hey, pop song!
Perfect segue there. Nice job, fellas.
Us, the players, then get to take control of our protagonist, Itsuki, Tsubasa's childhood friend, who randomly encounters Tsubasa at an audition event, not aware that she's actually participating in said event, hoping to kickstart her career as an idol. The questions she gets asked by the MC start getting more personal though, talking about the mass disappearance that happened 5 years ago, and bringing up her missing sister, but that'll be because he's been possessed by something called a Mirage, the shadows of this universe essentially. Mirages are attracted by something known as Perfoma, basically the soul of a performer, the MacGuffin that lets you sing, dance, and act. And the MC of the audition event summons Mirages to sap away the Perfoma from everyone in the room, while also kidnapping Tsubasa and taking her into the ATLUS, a gateway to another dimension that holds the Mirages. You know what, I'll just take the glasses off of Tsubasa now too, it's not all that necessary, is it? Itsuki gives chase to the MC anyway to try and rescue Tsubasa, and comes across Tiki as soon as he steps in, telling him that Tsubasa is in danger. Yeah, no shit she is, why do you think he stepped in? One of the Mirages finds Itsuki though and goes after him, but while running away he stumbles across Tsubasa being strangled by another Mirage. This causes Itsuki to awaken to his Perfoma and use it to turn the Mirages good. Tsubasa awakens to hers immediately afterwards and Itsuki just takes it to cleanse the other Mirage. Maybe so they can reuse the same animation from earlier. I'm not even kidding, look, there's barely a difference. The good Mirages quickly choose to team up with Itsuki and Tsubasa to rid of the remaining evil Mirages in the area, and they do this by initiating some sort of transformation sequence that they somehow already know how to do. Yeah, they just say the words Carnage form, which I have no idea why they would think to do that. And then the good Mirages change Itsuki and Tsubasa into Fire Emblem attire and forge themselves into weapons. Although I don't remember Pegasus Knights looking like this in Fire Emblem. The bad Mirages are taken care of regardless, and the good ones introduce themselves as Chrom and Sita from Fire Emblem Awakening and Shadow Dragon, neither of whom have any memories of what happened to them and their world. After traveling deeper inside the ATLUS, they all catch up to the MC, who challenges them to a fight, along with Itsuki and Tsubasa's other friend Toma, as in, it's not a Toma, with his Mirage being Kane, also from Shadow Dragon. They all partake in a fairly standard boss battle and free the MC from the Mirage that was possessing him, fixing everything in the real world as well. Toma explains to his friends about the concept of the Idolosphere, Mirages, and Mirage Masters, saying he's been doing this for a while, and as everyone tries to leave the Idolosphere, they get surrounded by a large number of Mirages, only to be saved by post-apocalyptic Miku here. Nah, she's really the idol we saw earlier named Kiria that Tsubasa heavily admires, but she gives the others time to escape. Upon stepping back inside the real world, the gang instantly come across Maiko, who explains that she works as Toma's and Kiria's leader of sorts to take care of any problems regarding Mirages, but she also happens to be the manager for Fortuna Entertainment. So not only can our heroes help with Mirage incidents, but they can also sign themselves up to be trained as idols. Itsuki and Tsubasa then get shown around the base, which is really just Fortuna Entertainment itself, and properly meet up with Tiki in this place called the Velvet Room, the Bloom Palace. Outside of this other world, Tiki's mainly known as a Vocaloid similar to Hatsune Miku, but she's a living being otherwise and doesn't have any memories either. Throughout a majority of the plot from here onwards, you're mostly just dealing with whatever comes the character's way and stopping different mirages that threaten Tokyo. This is whether it's something like a possessed photographer looking for the perfect model to shoot, or an overly strict director wanting to make his TV show absolutely perfect by any means necessary, including hurting his actors. The very first dungeon after the opening has you locate Tsubasa's sister and you have to try and get her to remember who she is. Then later on, your trainer Barry gets captured by more mirages and for some reason turn him into an 80s punk rocker, and Yashiro comes in a few times during the story, somehow surviving the mass disappearance. Nowadays, he's a lone wolf who only cares about his own career, acting as a rival to Itsuki, and to Fortuna in general, but he also seems to have a connection with Tiki even though she can't remember anything. There's around 6 chapters in the game outside of the prologue and epilogue, but it's not until chapter 5 where the situation becomes a little more dire, and also at last gives Fire Emblem a bigger callback. Until then, you're dealing with issues that are technically jeopardizing but don't feel like a terribly huge deal compared to other RPGs, and on the side, you're gathering more allies to your party as they join Fortuna Entertainment as well, while also watching the characters become more and more famous as their idol careers take off. You know what, I think that's kind of the other problem with a lot of the story. The characters never really seem to think that dealing with a current Mirage attack is more important than improving their abilities as an idol, so as a result they try to balance their work lives with their lives as Mirage Masters. It gives me the impression that this danger to society doesn't really need to be taken care of right away, just whenever you feel like it. Hell, you're not even given a timer for how long you've got to save Tokyo. I know that Persona does something very similar, in fact it can take several days before they deal with the current threats, but the difference there is that taking your time to establish bonds with your friends was entirely the point. Igor always talks about how you need your friends to back you up so that you can deal with the upcoming ruin with little to no error. Not to mention, and this is more for Persona 4 and 5, but the antagonists in those games could perform some pretty heinous crimes that do actually happen in the real world, like murder and blackmail. So of course our heroes are gonna want to be as prepared as possible to deal with someone as menacing as that. This is just stealing people's abilities to sing, dance, and act, which is not quite as relatable, since there are plenty of people that don't want to be idols or actors. At least I don't want to be an idol because I can't sing to save my life. Just check out my Persona 5 Strikers video. The situations don't feel all that distressing and the characters don't convince me that they are either, even when they send me dozens upon dozens of text messages telling me how terrible their circumstances are right now. But oh, they're also feeling a bit nervous about something. I should hang out with them for a while to see what's up. There's even one point at the endgame where the apocalypse is essentially about to happen, but Maiko still says that it's no excuse to forget about their jobs as idols. Bitch, the whole world could crumble at any moment. Screw the singing and dancing, we gotta do something about this first. In other words, if the characters don't feel the need to get these problems resolved right away, why should I? Anyway, I think now's a good time to go into story spoilers, so you should know how this works by now. Skip ahead to this point in the video if you want to finish the game first and come back later. Now let's carry on. Around 2/3 into the game, just as you clear the 4th chapter, the party find a strange crystal shard that's later revealed to be a dragonstone. They show it to Tiki after finding out, but this makes her head start hurting and she's knocked unconscious. Eventually, Tiki comes to again and explains that the dragonstone has given some of her memories back. It turns out the mass disappearance was caused by none other than Garneth, one of the main villains of Fire Emblem Shadow Dragon, and was in fact possessing Yashiro's father during the opera, which is likely why he still kept singing like a champ when everyone else was vanishing. Garnef was apparently performing a ritual called the Opera of Shadows to resurrect the Shadow Dragon himself, Medeus, and they had already succeeded once many years ago in the Mirages' homeland. Tiki and the other ally Mirages tried to fight back, but the results ended up fruitless, so were banished to the Idolosphere. The only reason the ritual didn't work during the mass disappearance was because Yashiro's father sacrificed his life to prevent Garnef from taking him over, with Tiki shielding Tsubasa and Yashiro so that they didn't fade away as well. Although we still saw Yashiro get affected, so did he get transported to the Idolosphere and he somehow found his way out? Before any more questions can be asked though, the local stadium seems to be covered by a giant Idolosphere with a whole bunch of Perfoma flowing into it. Tiki believes that everyone should be able to access its barrier by obtaining the last of the Dragonstone shards, and after revisiting dungeons and doing side stories for several hours, they find it. The gang once again display it to Tiki, but Garnef now seems to be calling her and the others to meet him at the stadium. They head over there, but to their surprise, they run into, oh yeah, I forgot about this dude. This is a producer you rescue early on, whose name I'm not even gonna bother remembering because he only appears maybe a couple other times after this, and he doesn't add anything important to the plot. Except for now, suddenly, because he turns out to be Garnef's Mirage Master and wants to help resurrect Medeus to suck away our world's Perfoma. The producer's only reason for doing all this is because he believes a bunch of teens battling a dragon to save the world would be the ultimate performance. It's nothing but one giant show to him. If this game didn't take the idea of beating Mirages with the power of song and dance so seriously, this probably could have been a funny as hell reason to be evil. But sadly, it does take itself seriously, and this guy ends up being a pretty boring villain. Even Garnef doesn't get much to do. He just shows up, sneers for a little bit, and then gets defeated fairly easily by the time you reach him in the next dungeon, hoping your experience with Shadow Dragon will fill in the blanks. Before that, however, Tiki tells everyone that in order to stop Medeus at this point, they'll need to perform the Opera of Light to summon the power of the divine dragon Naga. Tiki opens up another Idolosphere that contains the power of the heroes that defeated Medeus long ago, that being pieces of the Fire Emblem, though not in a physical sense this time. Inside this new Idolosphere, our group need to face 3 trials of proving their strength to the past heroes, and I'll say it is pretty cool that they bring in more characters from Shadow Dragon to these trials, even if they're all in Mirage forms. It's also nice to see the TMS cast learn about what happened during Shadow Dragon through carvings, mentioning how Garnef and Medeus were previously sealed by the Hero King Marth, and they do know how to tease the appearance of Marth in this last chapter, making you wonder if you're ever gonna see him. The last trial's a bit different though, since the producer and Garnef have broken in and stolen Marth's soul, with the producer also giving away his Perfoma to Garnef so that he can regain his physical form. But even after defeating them, the soul of Marth and Garnef's sacrifice was enough to complete the Opera of Shadows, allowing the resurrection of Medeus. With the fate of the world now in peril, the final dungeon is in the Idolosphere by the stadium we looked at earlier, where at the end of it they reach a conveniently laid out stage to perform the Opera of Light. Medeus himself shows up though, just as they're starting, and lasers Itsuki right in the chest, but the gems from the Fire Emblem knock back Medeus, which causes him to drop the soul of Marth, allowing Itsuki to absorb and cosplay as the Hero King himself. Oh, and I guess he has his power or something too. With this, the party can now carry out the Opera of Light, and I'll admit, for as mushy as this game gets a lot of the time, this was a rather cool scene. The visuals are pretty nice, the singing's at some of its best, and yeah, hearing everybody do the Fire Emblem theme right in the middle of it was the icing on the cake. Minus points though for making Tiki look badass by transforming into a dragon but not showing what her true form looks like, and then immediately follow it with this candy-colored mockery. What a shame. Anyway, the final battle against Medeus can be quite tough, and it might take a while to beat both of his phases, but as long as you haven't neglected every single one of the side stories the game offers and stop yourself from unlocking extra perks, you should be fine. At last, Medeus is defeated, probably feeling embarrassed and wondering how he went from being killed by the mighty warrior Marth to losing to a group of pop idols, and the soul of Marth can now rest in peace with no Shadow Dragon to worry about anymore. Days pass by, and after checking on your teammates once more, Itsuki visits the Bloom Palace to see Tiki and the other Mirages, but they tell him that it's time for them to go back to their own world, leaving almost immediately and aren't even gonna wait for the other masters to come in and say goodbye as well, the jerks. That's the end of the game, but if all of the side stories get completed before finishing, there's a post-credit scene where Maiko announces that she's returning to her old modeling career, meaning she wants to make Itsuki the new manager of Fortuna Entertainment.
Yeah, hi, you can't just do that.
That's quite a lot of pressure to put on a teenager right on the spot like that. How are Itsuki's parents going to react to this? How is he going to balance his school life with being a manager? What happens if he wants to go to college? How are the new recruits going to feel about being run by someone who hasn't even finished school yet? How did he even get this job with zero managerial experience? Yes, he was the leader of a group who prevented Mirage attacks, but that's not the same as running a whole goddamn entertainment industry. This is an absolutely crazy decision that would never fly in the real world. But this is a parallel universe full of sunshine, rainbows, and unicorns. So while the work was hard and a little bit stressful, Itsuki seems to be doing a good job at maintaining his sanity and probably never having any free time to himself anymore. That was a lot we discussed regarding Tokyo Mirage Sessions story, but it's pretty basic when you get down to it. The only real significant moments are during the opening couple of chapters and the final chapter. The bits in between are kinda just fluff, only there to marginally grow the characters, even though they already seem to be fairly confident in what they're doing for the most part. Then when they rarely do screw up, it's almost in a comical sense, as if it would hardly ever happen in real life. Like Tsubasa filming a TV show and acting so over-the-top bad it isn't believable. I know I mentioned this in the plot synopsis, but this really could be funny if Tokyo Mirage Sessions didn't take itself with such a straight face. Yes, they do throw in some comedic moments to lighten the mood, but not once did I personally laugh, because if you've watched any high school slice of life anime, and I mean any high school slice of life anime, you'll have seen all of these gags done before. Even when there are setups that could potentially be humorous, Tokyo Mirage Sessions never wants to go all the way with it. Take this for example, where one of the characters, Mamori, has a TV show that's just putting food in a microwave with an upbeat attitude, and that's it. But it still seems to be really popular across Japan. See, there's a great idea for a joke somewhere, or maybe some commentary on cooking shows in general, but the game just doesn't do anything with it, ironically leaving you starving for more. The scenes simply stop before they start getting funny and go back to their comfort zones, feeling like an utter waste of possibilities. Sadly, the characters themselves are about on the same level in terms of originality too. You've got the protagonist who's a good leader, but he's a little dim when talking face to face with people. Seriously, this kid can be beyond dense at times. Take a goddamn hint, will ya? All the girls want to bang ya, although you might want to keep away from Maiko-san. This chick can be very inappropriate a lot of the time. She would get her ass fired on multiple occasions if she tried some of this stuff anywhere else. Anyway, we also have the best friend, who's not very bright, but he has a really big heart. There's the childhood love interest, who's extremely clumsy, shy, and reserved, clearly having a crush on the protagonist, but she just can't find the courage to tell him. You've got the cool, spunky character who might in fact enjoy cute things as well but doesn't want to show it. There's the big shot who's very full of herself but deep down is just a frightened little girl who wants to belong somewhere. We're given the adorable, innocent, and youngest party member who's just so dang precious that she's almost like a sister to everyone. And finally, there's the guy who works alone and doesn't need anyone's help to get by. However, by hanging out with the gang long enough, he gradually learns the meaning of not only teamwork, but also friendship. It hits every anime RPG cliche in the book. It's almost laughable how stock these characters are, on top of the schmaltzy dialogue and story, but honestly, I'm a sucker for some of these archetypes. They have been used time and time again in anime and RPGs, but damn it, it's a working formula. Granted, it did take a while for me to adjust to these characters because of how ridiculously uninspired they were, and while the opening hours weren't bad, there was nothing that got me hooked straight away. I think it was maybe around the 4th or 5th hour after clearing the first major dungeon where I started getting attached, and that may have been due to the introduction of various side stories that each character has a total of 3. More on that later, but I completely, wholly understand if you do not find these characters or the story endearing in the slightest, and it ruins a lot of the game for you. I really do get it. This game is so saccharine and everybody's as cookie cutter as they come, at worst being downright unlikable in the case of Barry for me personally, because he's a whiny little bitch. Probably not helping the matter is Tokyo Mirage Sessions only having Japanese dubs for the characters. There are none in English whatsoever, and like with Persona Q2, I don't mind doing some reading, nor do I have a problem with foreign languages, but I would have liked to have at least been given the option. I'm a little more forgiving about it with the Wii U original since it was a brand new IP from ATLUS back then and maybe they weren't sure about reactions, but why does Encore not have it either? Hell, we know they can provide English dubs because they did exactly that in Fire Emblem Heroes when the characters were added in celebration of Encore's release. You're capable of giving them English voices in the mobile game, but not in the game they're actually from? How does that make any sense? I do at least think seeing the characters interact and talk with their Mirages is a pretty neat concept. I'm surprised the Persona series never thought to do that. Like, how cool would it be to see Joker have a conversation with Arsene, or Yosuke with Jiraiya, or Nanjo with the one that represents his deceased butler if we want to go a little dark. It is unfortunate to see most of the Fire Emblem cameos be reduced to just these Mirages though, and I hope you like Awakening and Shadow Dragon because none of the other games get referenced in Tokyo Mirage Sessions. No Blazing Blade, no Gaiden, no Sacred Stones, not even the Tellius games get callbacks. Fire Emblem really got the short end of the stick here, but I guess I shouldn't expect much given that ATLUS initially had no idea how best to fit both Fire Emblem and Shin Megami Tensei. Graphically, Tokyo Mirage Sessions doesn't look too bad for a Wii U game, not amazing, but it's a step up from Persona 3, 4, and SMT games like Nocturne where they were viewed from a third-person perspective. I don't know if it's just me though, and if I maybe needed to adjust the color settings on my capture card or whatever, but this game has a crazy amount of bloom for some reason, even outside of the Bloom Palace. It's like everyone's standing directly under the sun, it's so damn bright. Slight nitpick as well, but the style of the anime cutscenes can be a bit inconsistent at times too. These were done by Studio Anima, who also worked on the cutscenes for Fire Emblem Awakening and eventually the Fates games, and they all do look wonderful in Tokyo Mirage Sessions, but the game can't seem to decide whether it wants to stick with a traditional 2D style or go full CG, or just switch to something else entirely. This makes more sense in something like the music videos the characters perform at the end of each side story, but when it's just the main plot or there's a concert going on, the cutscenes like to swap back and forth between different styles, rather than stick with only one. It's not that big of a deal at the end of it, I just found it a little strange. The only thing about the graphics that I found to be deeply distracting were the characters leaving their mouths gaping wide open whenever they're shocked or happy. It reminds me of when Persona 4 Dancing All Night did that, only now it's in 3D and it looks really awkward when it happens. Why did ATLUS like doing this so much in 2015? Speaking of music videos earlier though, despite Tokyo Mirage Sessions' entire theme being heavily focused on music, the actual soundtrack is in my opinion not one of ATLUS's finest. This OST wasn't done by Shoji Meguro, who normally does all of the SMT and Persona ones, instead being replaced by Yoshiaki Fujisawa, who didn't have much experience as a composer before Tokyo Mirage Sessions. Fujisawa himself even makes a cameo during one of Tsubasa's side stories. He hasn't done a bad job by any means, there's just a lot of fairly generic pop songs, the music in the dungeons are pretty forgettable, and the battle themes are simply okay. Not quite getting me pumped and ready to fight Mirages. I do have a few exceptional songs however. The boss music at the end of the third dungeon did a much better job at hyping me up, and I was glad to see it come back at a few other points too. There's also the duet with Tsubasa and Kiria called Give Me, which is so upbeat and full of energy it's hard not to tap along to it, and oh my god, the credits music has been stuck in my head for many months now. Ever since I first completed the game earlier this year, it's unbelievably catchy.
Good Christ, I've only just noticed how long I've been talking without even going over the gameplay for Tokyo Mirage Sessions. I really can't control myself when it comes to Megami Tensei titles, whether Fire Emblem's involved or not, but let's get into it anyway.
Playing Tokyo Mirage Sessions was an interesting experience because I can see elements of Persona 4 and Persona 5 here. It's almost like a Persona 5 prototype, which makes sense seeing how this was released in between both games. While the dungeons do have a fair number of hallways to look around, they're not randomly generated like they are in Persona 4. Sorta testing the waters, I guess, for when the palaces get made for Persona 5. Even going as far as putting in puzzles and small quirks to make each dungeon feel distinct to one another. They're not absolutely amazing dungeons, but they get the job done. And the battles themselves, as expected from ATLUS, are pretty fun. To start one, you need to run into an enemy Mirage, but like in Persona 3 and 4, if you time your sword strike well enough, that'll knock him over, potentially allowing your entire party to act first in the battle. Just watch out for the savage Mirages who are way stronger than the usual enemies you fight and you can't knock them down. It's the usual turn-based RPG stuff we've come to know from ATLUS by now, where the aim is to abuse enemy weaknesses, very neatly throwing in the weapons triangle from Fire Emblem as well, where swords have the advantage over axes, axes beat lances, and lances beat swords. But enemies could also be weak to elemental attacks just like in Megami Tensei. Coming back from Persona 2, there's a cue at the top of the screen to let you know whose turn's going to be next, allowing you to prepare ahead of time, and the one major feature you'll want to get used to in Tokyo Mirage Sessions is the session skill system. The Mirages for every party member turn into their respective weapons, and on top of having a traditional leveling system where the members' personal stats grow, which by the way I really love the artwork for,
There's a separate experience system for the weapons that earn you extra attacks and abilities. There's a limit to how many you can equip, of course, but thankfully attacks, session skills, and passive abilities are in different categories, so you shouldn't have to worry too much about what you'll want to keep and what you should discard. And any overlapping skills will slightly reduce the cost to cast it or increase its power. The session skills, however, play just as, if not a more important role than the regular attacks. Let's say I use Itsuki to cast lightning on an enemy. As long as one of my current party members has a session skill that requires someone to hit an enemy with lightning, that same person can do a follow-up attack with their element, and if another party member has a session skill that follows up from that element, they'll jump in too, and so on until potentially every character gets to attack. Watch out though, because the enemies also have session skills if they hit one of your party members with their weaknesses, and they can do some extreme damage if they get you. At the start of the game, you'll only get to keep going until everyone in the current party strikes the enemy, but after improving their stage rank enough by simply having that party member partake in enough battles, they can get an ability in the Bloom Palace to do their session skills even when they're not active. In Encore, thanks to the new dungeon adding Barry, Maiko, and Tiki into the mix as well, the combo can reach greater heights to the point that you may want to turn off the animations to speed things along, although the combo can end immediately if a character misses their session, or if the enemy nullifies a particular element. I also wouldn't recommend equipping light and dark spells because very few enemies are actually weak to them, but the session skills overall are undoubtedly the coolest feature Tokyo Mirage Sessions brings to the table, and I'm kinda glad it's exclusive to this and not any Megami Tensei or Fire Emblem games, at least not yet. Slightly a pace breaker though, where even after depleting an enemy's health, you'll still have to wait for the session to finish before the battle truly ends. You'll want to get used to session skills as soon as possible regardless, because while the enemies aren't too annoying to beat, a majority of the bosses can give you a surprisingly hard time, partly from having strong attacks, and partly from having tough assistants that respawn after a few turns. Your weapons only have so many skills to offer before you max them out on top of this, so what you'll then need to do is head over to the Bloom Palace and let Tiki perform what she calls Carnage Unity. Sadly, it doesn't involve symbiotes merging with Cletus Cassidy. Basically, Tiki takes the necessary materials that drop from enemies to create a stronger weapon for you with additional skills that you'll need to earn through more battling. Or if you want to, you can make your current weapon slightly more powerful and gain an additional skill by maxing out its level again. Tiki can also handle Radiant Unities, which are permanent abilities to a party member like surviving with 1 HP before death, or as I mentioned earlier, attack during sessions without being in the current party. These also require materials to make, this time from certain treasure chests, stage rank rewards, and sometimes going a step further by engaging in each of the characters' 3 side stories. They're Tokyo Mirage Sessions equivalent to social links in the Persona games, with the focus temporarily being on the chosen character until the side story is done. But unlike Persona, you can only do one side story at a time. If you want to do another one, then you'll need to cancel the one that's active. And I really don't understand why you have to do this. Each of the side stories only take around 15 minutes or roughly half an hour if there's a boss battle going on, and we know full well that ATLUS is capable of letting us multitask, so why the sudden restriction? Either way, you'll want to get these done as soon as possible because completing them unlocks new special performances for the characters, which are special attacks and abilities they can do in battle, whether it's damaging all of the enemies or healing them while boosting their stats. They cost up to 3 SP to use though, and that confused me at first because I was so used to playing Persona and thought SP was my magic points, but no, it's not the same thing. In addition to special performances, various side stories will also unlock ad-lib performances that activate randomly when someone attacks during their turn, which can be pretty handy. Then, in case that wasn't enough, they'll lastly unlock duo arts, where during a session you'll occasionally get the option to have 2 party members land another super attack, with some of them healing everyone or removing status ailments at the same time, and on the rare chance reviving any dead party members. Yeah, like I said, you'll want to get the side stories done pronto to obtain these, and it also makes the game more fun and less of a grind as a result. The only thing that's fairly annoying is that unless you're playing on New Game Plus, you can't switch Itsuki out with another party member, so that means spending more time raising everyone's stage rank so that you'll have access to the side story in the first place. Luckily, if you level up their stage ranks enough to do backup attacks during sessions, that counts as them participating in battle, which makes it a lot easier to increase stage ranks even further. But you are able to swap party members in the middle of battle should you need to do so, and without wasting a turn a la Final Fantasy X. Thus, Radiant Unities will also come more quickly, but you'll also want to make sure you use the Master Seals you find throughout the game to have Tiki change the Mirages' classes like in Fire Emblem. Class changes not only adjust the Mirage Master's stats with different strengths and weaknesses, but you'll be able to fuse even more weapons with even more powerful skills, so don't forget to change classes. Although with how often your friends text you about new upgrades, I doubt you'll ever forget. You get text messages for friggin' everything, along with those stupid and pointless stickers they love to add on. There's a text for when a new Carnage or Radiant Unity's ready, when the characters want to start their side stories, constantly reminding you of your next objective in the story when you've had 3 other people tell you the same goddamn thing. There's a point where Barry even texts you because he's bored while you're busy fighting off Mirages. And in a few side stories, Tiki will text countdowns to how many specific enemies you have to fight. Who does this? Get off your phones and talk to one another, you damn millennials. Thank God ATLUS toned it down by the time they got to Persona 5. Ooh, yep, I'm starting to feel irritated, so I'll quickly bring this up. Chapter 5 just plain sucks. This is where you have to find a Dragonstone for Tiki, but you have to go back through every single dungeon you've already cleared, just because of this one barrier hiding away the Dragonstone. Now, to be fair, you're not exploring the exact same places again, as new areas can be traversed via these previously impassable gates, but it still feels like you're doing the same dungeons again, and it takes forever to get this damn Dragonstone, especially when you've got more side stories to deal with. It's the only part of the game that I really didn't like, but it's still pretty bad padding in my opinion.
So yeah, Tokyo Mirage Sessions has some problems, a lot of it having to do with the story and characters, not enough appreciation for Fire Emblem, and several minor gameplay issues that pile on top of each other, but I don't think those issues are enough to bring TMS down too much to be called a bad game.
It's certainly not one I would play multiple times, and in terms of Megami Tensei games, Tokyo Mirage Sessions doesn't have nearly as much replayability, apart from maybe deciding when to do the side stories, but even then there's no rush to do them straight away, unlike Persona. The game's 40 plus hours long, including the side stories, which is standard RPG length, and to its credit, I rarely felt the burn. And if you do want more, there's New Game Plus to go through with some added mini-bosses and a harder version of the final battle, but sadly not much else. You could maybe try and complete the smaller side quests, but honestly I found them to be pretty meaningless. The session skills are without question the most unique aspect of Tokyo Mirage Sessions, and I wouldn't mind this one mechanic being turned into its own series of games, but I doubt ATLUS would try something like this again, at least not for quite some time. TMS is baby's first Persona in a nutshell, and I don't mean that as a derogatory term. If you like the RPG stuff in Persona games but found the socializing and scheduling too stressful, then maybe give Tokyo Mirage Sessions a try. It could change your mind. Is it the best Megaten game? Not really. It's a little too weird and syrupy, but with the mild swearing and tough gameplay, it's difficult to decipher who Tokyo Mirage Sessions is even made for. Is it a good Fire Emblem game? Oh hell no, it isn't even in the same category. But I don't see TMS as a blight on humanity like some people think it is.
Get the Encore re-release though if you do have to play it. There's no point buying the Wii U original anymore, but if you can experience it for a decent price, you could do a lot worse. It passes the time if you've run out of Megaten games to play, but it probably won't blow you away at any point. Next up in the Fire Emblem Marathon anyway is the Fates titles, tackling 3 big games in one video. Now, I am still working my way through Shin Megami Tensei 5, so please bear with me for the review on that. But until then, we'll have a look at Metroid Dread, which I am beyond excited to talk about. I'll see you all next time, and until then, thank you everyone for watching, stay safe, stay healthy, and take care of yourselves. There was a possibility that this is the Fates titles. We will have a look at Metroid Dread. Damn. I don't think any of those things are enough to be called